How do you expect this race to go down when it's ultimately called?
At this point, it would be a surprise if Kailey Stevens were to pull it out. I'm not saying that there's no path for her. Certainly polls have been off before. If there's very heavy African-American turnout, there is a path for her. But we've been seeing these past few weeks that the momentum and polling clearly shows that it's Abdul El-Sayed that has the energy behind him. And I think it really does speak to, as you all were talking about earlier, it's the direction of the party. I think that people want people who are going to stand up to the leaders of the party. Kailey Stevens has been very allied with people like Chuck Schumer and with AIPAC on her votes for Israel. And I think that's just really becoming a dividing line in the party. But this represents a real test of whether that approach can work in a general election in a swing state, because this is not New York City. This is not a liberal enclave like Denver. This is one of the swingiest states in the country that in 2024 split and voted for a more moderate Democrat for Senate and Alyssa Slotkin, but also still voted for Donald Trump for president. And so this is a tough state for Democrats to have to defend. And as much as they are going on offense in places that are unexpected, like Texas and Iowa, this is still a state that they have to keep in their column.
Well, so, Jessica, is this a night then that we decide whether this is a national trend, or will the analysis point us back to specific issues in this race, whether it's candidate quality, anti-incumbency, anger at AIPAC? At what point do we connect the dots from coast to coast?
I think that it will be a real dividing line tonight, Will, because this has been the highest profile fight, and it's not happening. It's happening in America's heartland. I think that this really tells, because Michigan, if you look back, they have elected more moderate senators like Alyssa Slotkin, like Gary Peters, Debbie Stabenow, that was there for decades. It's been sort of more middle of the road establishment people. But I think that August is going to tell us whether this trend continues or not. You have Minnesota next week, where you have the more progressive Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan up against the more centrist Congresswoman Angie Craig. That's not as competitive of a seat, but it's still one that we are watching. And then you have the Wisconsin governor's race. To be clear, neither Flanagan nor El-Sayed identify as a Democratic Socialist, but Francesca Hong in Wisconsin next week does identify as a member of the DSA, and she has not had some of the candidate skills that Abdul El-Sayed has had in communicating. And this is a real race for governor in another very quintessential swing state that could be put more on the board. You see the incumbent governor, Tony Evers, backing a candidate in Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley, who just got back in the race to try to stop Hong. Whether that is too little, too late, we will see. But I think August is going to tell us a lot about the direction of the Democratic Party. And I think a lot of it stems from President Trump, that they see that he has sort of upended his party for the past decade. And I think Democrats are kind of coming to this reckoning that, you told us someone like Joe Biden was going to stop Trump. And if we went sort of with this middle of the road tested establishment figure, and Donald Trump is back in the White House, and you have really people within the party that are energized to come out in November, but they're energized, I think, if you have people like Abdul El-Sayed on the ballot. At least that's the argument that their campaigns are making.
Well, and on that notion of energy, Jessica, if El-Sayed is capturing that kind of energy, should we consider it a foregone conclusion that Mike Rogers is going to have an easier time running against him than he would Kailey Stevens?
I think it's a real test. I mean, you still have swing voters in Michigan. You have more swing voters than you have in Manhattan or Brooklyn. So it's still a real test. I think that national Democrats are right to feel more comforted if it were someone like Kailey Stevens, because this has been a tried and true approach. And El-Sayed has got to prove that he can bring out lower propensity younger voters. But if that's happening, then I think there is something that is changing within sort of the politics of how this moves. Again, I think that Democrats will have to spend more money here if it's El-Sayed to keep those more swing voters in their camp. But if they are able to bring out newer voters that we typically don't see come out in a midterm environment, that could change the calculus. I think this seat, just because of the environment, is competitive with El-Sayed still. But it's certainly a new type of test that we have not seen. It reminds me, though, of 2010 in many ways, where you saw Tea Party candidates upset establishments. candidates, and some of those candidates proved to be weaker candidates. We'll see what Abdul El-Sayed, because Republicans lost winnable races, and notably, even as they flipped the House in 2010, they did not flip the Senate. So does a state like Michigan, is this a backstop perhaps for Republicans? I will say there are some Republicans that are worried about sort of the fundraising that Mike Rogers is putting out. They want to see him do better, and perhaps if this race moves to the top of the competitive list with El-Sayed, you could see more Republican dollars flowing there. But it's still a really critical element of both sides in Republicans keeping the Senate and then Democrats taking it back.
What do you make of this new poll, Jessica, from Reuters Ipsos today? Pretty remarkable. It took 10 years for Democrats to turn this around. Chosen over Republicans, albeit by 1 percentage point, as who are better stewards of the economy. It's been since 2017 that a majority went with the D's on this one. In this case, 37% registered voters, 36% picked the Republican Party. It's within the margin here. 27% said they were not sure. But I'm wondering if we can call this a trend line, who that helps, and if it's not El-Sayed.
I mean, it helps Democrats. El-Sayed talks about putting money in your pocket. And I think that he has really doubled down on an economic message in a way that I think some other more DSA-aligned candidates like Francesca Hong have been struggling to do in recent days and have gotten tripped up on more cultural issues. I think that Mamdani we see him, he's a very gifted communicator. He was able to dial down on affordability concerns, and I think El-Sayed has been able to do the same thing. But, this was supposed to be Trump's superpower that he was bringing back to the White House, was to be able to turn the economy around. And we see that we've been tracking at the Cook Political Report his economic approval rating, and that has been dropping very steadily, especially with the war in Iran. Voters are connecting the war in Iran to affordability, to gas prices, to prices being higher, and tariffs. It all rolls into the affordability question.
And finally, Jessica, we have some breaking news from the office of Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who has just put out a statement saying that she will be voting against the nomination of Todd Blanche to serve as the next Attorney General. She says, while she believes Mr. Blanche is a capable lawyer, the Department of Justice has become increasingly political. He has taken several actions that have further eroded the department's independence, and that is the basis for my vote to oppose his confirmation. Is that political necessity for her in a state like Maine?
I think when you look at where Trump's approval ratings are in a state that he lost very, easily in 2024, she has to separate herself from the president. And so I think she's probably given more cover than other Republicans would be given to vote against this nomination. They can spare her vote. Of course, they don't have Mitch McConnell's right now. So it is a much tighter numbers in the Senate that they're dealing with. But I think this is a vote that she probably has to take in order to keep her electoral hopes alive. Now, she has overperformed there in Maine. We've, of course, seen a new nominee come in Democrat Troy Jackson. I think he's still having to prove himself and introduce himself to voters with 100 days out. But Susan Collins is in the most vulnerable position that she's ever been in.